Hello and welcome to the Next Level Supply Chain with GS1 US, a podcast in which we explore the mind-bending world of global supply chain, covering topics such as automation, innovation, unique identity, and more. I'm your co-host, Reed.
And I'm Liz.
And welcome to the show. Hello, everyone. Our guest today is Scott Downs. He's the CTO of Invisible Technologies. We spend a lot of time talking about artificial intelligence and the value and advantages it brings, but also the challenges it brings. And Scott's company focuses on process, repeatable process and people and how they interlink and where we can make them repetitive and where we can leverage tools like artificial intelligence and where we can't. And he gives some really great examples within this. This goes way beyond SOP documents. And yes, we talk about ChatGPT. I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as we did. Hey, Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we're glad you can spend some time with us. We're gonna jump into artificial intelligence and frictionless online experiences and processes. But before we do all that, would you be so kind and just tell us a little bit more about yourself and Invisible Technologies and your role with the company?
Sure. So my name's Scott Downs. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Invisible Technologies. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself in a second, but let me start with the company. I'll just say that I think we're not a startup anymore, but we've been around for about 7 or 8 years. We're growing really rapidly, and the core of what we do is that we take business processes that are running inside of our companies, inside of our clients, and we optimize them. As far as myself, my work is about building a platform. So we are a services company with a strong core platform. And that's a little bit of a different angle in some ways than the way that some companies have approached things over the years. I've built enterprise SaaS platforms before where our expectation is that we build this great technology tool and then we hope that our clients learn how to use it. And I think that we found that over the years, there's so many tools, and as our founder likes to say, there's an app for everything. So all the problems should be solved, right? But as it turns out, there's a lot of value that we can provide by being expert guides to the problem space where we are experts. We're sort of like process Sherpas. We take people to the mountaintop every day.
I love that.
And as far as what I do on a day in, day out basis, I mean, I got to say, I love being a CTO because there's a wide variety of things that I touch and engage with every day. My background is a little bit diverse, I guess, compared to some CTOs. I did work as an engineer for a long time, but before that, I was a designer. I worked in print publishing, made my living as a musician for a while. So it took me a while to find my way into software development as a full-time career. And part of the reason why I'm so passionate about it is that I feel like it's the ideal sort of combination of a diversity of skills.
Liz, I know you wanted to jump in with a question you and I were talking about.
Yeah. I wanted to dive in a little bit more, Scott, to what you said about the process Sherpas and why having that process in place aids in problem solving, and what that can mean for the customers that you work with. Just expand on that a little bit for me, if you would.
Sure, absolutely. It does come down to those thoughtful touches. And I like to think that the way that we approach process is the same. When you hear companies talk about the importance of repeatable process in their business, it's pretty obvious what the impact there is going to be. You want to have higher quality. You want to have higher velocity. You want to have lower costs. The kind of standard KPIs in that space are well understood. The problem is the devil's in the details, of course. The problem is the way that you approach that. So we've seen a lot of companies, even ourselves, as we were evolving over the last couple of years, we've seen the importance of having processes be a core model in our system. And I'm going to unpack that and explain exactly what that means. But first, I'll define by difference. I'll say that a lot of companies, when they talk about standardizing on processes, the output of that kind of exercise of understanding how to standardize is maybe SOP documents. Maybe it's something that lives in a Word doc or a Google doc. Maybe it lives in a disparate set of systems in processes. Maybe it lives in a meeting schedule. Like the way that processes are embodied in a company is pretty broad. Like it's such a broad term. What we do that's a little bit different is that we map processes into our platform on a canvas that looks like a flowchart that you can see. So if you're our client, the work that we're doing for you will be clearly visible in a process on a canvas composed of steps. And those steps, they might be automated steps where there's some technology that is engaged to run an automation. They might be integrations. So they typically they fall into two buckets: automated pieces and manual pieces. And when I say manual, I mean labor driven. So if you imagine any process of any significance in any company at any scale, if you could take a cross section of a company, if you could reach in and say, how do we hire people, as an example? Now there are third-party software systems that you use. You might be using some hiring software. You also might be using, you're definitely going to be using human beings who are engaging in an interview process. And you probably have a documented process for how you want to run that. So you might think, okay, this is the way that we recruit or engage recruiters. This is how we put it into our platform. Here's what people do during interviews. In no case would you run a significant process like hiring that's critical to a company without having some combination of human labor, third-party software, and probably, when you get to significant scale, custom automations that are specific to your environment. Right. So when we put all those pieces together, if you can imagine a process being something that embodies and wraps its arms around and orchestrates all those pieces, that's how you solve real problems in businesses.
It's so interesting. I was going in a lot of different fashions on this of, supply chain has process to it, right? And my boss last year was like, hey, write it down. Like that was the mantra. And now we joke about it. And I think she's annoyed every time I say, hey, he's told us to write it down. But I actually just last week was doing some strategy work and I was writing down the steps. And I would write them down and I'm like, wait, there's a lot more steps to this. It's not just that step. It's this step. And you realize there's a lot more granularity behind it. And then when you have it all written down, you start to see like, oh, wow, here's a spot where we could really automate this, right? Like an automated email response, right? That's an automation. Whereas before we would write each one out. Why don't we use like a mail merge type thing or, something like that? And just help automate it so we can spend more focus time on the more critical pieces where these are just kind of like, hey, just make sure we don't lose contact with them type of thing. So it's very interesting when you really step back to write this down. I want to change gears here just a little bit because we talk about automation, we talk about manual. And the title of this podcast has artificial intelligence in it, right? And we're trying to, reduce the friction here. And we all know that, and if you don't, Chat GPT is like taking over the internet. It's like every day I wake up and there's another article or there's something in the news on TV or something around this Chat GPT with OpenAI. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more. But my question is this. It's causing people to feel fear of artificial intelligence. I have some personal feelings on this, and maybe we can talk about it. But what is the main concern that you hear surrounding AI on a daily basis?
Well, I guess there are two. Excuse me. First, one that's very practical. I think people are afraid of jobs being lost. Yeah, they're seeing the opportunity. It's one of the sort of key innovations of tools like GPT is that they're generative. That's what the G stands for. We're creating new content.
Right.
A lot of folks are afraid of what that can mean for their day-to-day jobs. And what that can mean on a practical level is, my wife worked as a copywriter for a while. And works in marketing functions. And you could imagine a world where a lot of copywriting work for businesses is taken over by tools like GPT.
Sure.
And similarly on the design side, design is a visual design is a refined craft, requires some artisanship and experience. And now with tools like DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, you can see that people can create really impressive visual designs just from words. Right. So I think that there's the first thing is sort of a fear of what does this mean for me? And I think that's a really normal, practical, even healthy response to thinking about the impact of technologies like this. But I'll just take those two examples and talk about what's happening in my company and what I see, especially with younger folks who are seeing this technology for the first time. So I can absolutely understand the perspective of fear and concern about what does this mean for me. And I was delighted to see that our internal PR person and also one of our designers both were on top of this stuff from the start. People whose day-to-day jobs might theoretically be affected by this, but what they found is that this was sort of like being able to wear an Iron Man suit. Right. This is something that's been core to our business for a while. We truly believe that technology is supposed to be invisible. It's supposed to enable people to do amazing things. And it's not an end in itself. So when I see a young designer using DALL-E to create designs, I think, wow, that's really smart. That's a great way to get ahead of the problem. And when I see a PR person using tools like Jasper, which is kind of amazing and is also built on this GPT framework, what I think is not that human work is being displaced. I think that humans are being put in a position to do things that are uniquely human, and machines are doing things that are better for machines. So right. If it can be automated, then it ought to be with human supervision. But I think that if you think about this on a practical level, if you have a better set of tools to solve your problem, then you're elevated by that. You're elevated by that technology, not diminished. So I could go on more there, but I think that basically we all feel a twinge of uncertainty when new technology comes out of like, what does this mean for me? The other thing, though, that's really significant, and you really can't ignore it because it's so prominent in media narratives around artificial intelligence, is sort of this fear of reaching this general intelligence kind of concept of like right. The machines are thinking. I would refer to that as like a Skynet.
Consciousness, the whole consciousness piece.
Yeah. There have been some articles that came out in the last week where there was some deep soul searching about the types of responses that were being provided by the Bing experiment in GPT powered search. And I think that those kind of concerns, I don't want to diminish them, but I think that that's the hysteria piece. I think that we're rapidly approaching a place where AI and ML techniques can solve real world business problems in a really useful way. And that the kind of apocalyptic scenarios don't really match the reality of what this technology does.
Yeah. And I also, there's so many things going through my mind right now because media, it's to grab your attention, right? It's to get an emotional reaction out of you. And so they kind of push those things. I was reading an article this morning that it grabbed my attention right away. It was a teacher and things they were doing in the classroom. And I won't even get into it, but I was like, what? And then I read the article and it's like, yeah, we're not doing those things, but that's what people think we're doing. And I was like, oh my goodness gracious, thank the Lord that, you weren't really doing that. But it was just to show how short bit media clips and no context can really, change things out. And then it also brings us back to, like the original industrial revolution with like the Luddites going in and, breaking
Exactly
the
right.
machines. And if we think back to, there are people's jobs that will be replaced by machines. There's no doubt about it. But other jobs will be created because of this as well. I look at my kids who are, middle school age right now, and they know so much more than I ever knew at their age. And my son actually used Chat GPT to write a paper the other day, and we had a good talk about ethics, on that type of thing. But at the same time, I'm like, but these are the resources you have, just like you have a calculator. Now you need to understand the fundamentals and you need to be able to go in and tweak some things. And I've read lots of articles of people that write code for AI that are using their own AI to help them get 80% of the way there and then tweak it. So it's like, I'm super excited, as I always say, Liz, but I'm super excited about the potential for healthcare and what we can actually break through to, really treat our bodies and maintain our health and quality of life. Because I have a lot of family members that are going through cancer treatments right now, and I'm like, we're actually radiating their bodies. Like, we're poisoning them to make them better. It just sounds so dark age to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think some of the healthcare and use cases for AI and ML are pretty amazing. I had a conversation with a guy who runs a company that's providing a similar sort of service to ours at Invisible. His company is focused specifically on medical diagnostic use cases. And it's interesting that like we're at a place where the ideal solutions for these sorts of problems, the best implementations tend to be human in the loop, human supervised AI ML. If you think about the job of, say, a radiologist or anyone whose job is to do medical diagnostics, that's a tough job. It's a tough job to where you're simultaneously having to present several different, be an expert in several different skill sets. So I know that when I see my doctor, a big part of the job for him is communication in a bedside manner. And another part of the job is sorting through lots of data points. Another part of the job is figuring out what tests to run and find out what are we going to test you on this year? What are the blood tests going to cover? And a lot of that's driven by industry standards and convention. And then how do you think about retraining those people over time? If you kind of, I think this is what you're implying, if you break down a lot of the normal everyday things that we do in our society that we accept as standard best practice, what you'd find is areas that are just rife for optimization. And what this gentleman that I met recently last fall was sharing with me was how they do the accuracy of their diagnostic approach is driven by an understanding of the scarcity of human attention. So if you think about it, all it takes is one bad day for someone to miss something on a scan.
That's
And
right.
what you want is you want to backstop those sorts of problems with technology and then backstop the technology with people. And the term we generally use for that at Invisible is orchestration. Now, orchestration could mean a lot of things in different contexts, but for us, what that really means is the right balance of human attention and machine attention. And if you think about it, there's so many cases where we have those exactly wrong and exactly backwards. I was talking to an insurance company about some problems that they were facing related to a particular process that they were running. And they said that there are certain cases that they have to send to a specific person in a specific office in Florida, because she's the only one who understands the particular aspects of Florida law as it relates to a particular healthcare situation. And I think like as much as that may create a perception of job security, I can't help but imagine that poor person sitting in their office in Orlando every day. Their job is to do something that's basically much better suited for a machine. and that they're being used like a human calculator. And I don't believe that that's something that's ennobling or exciting in life. And what we think about, and we even like really like the Red Bull slogan, like Red Bull gives you wings. We think about how our platform enables people to elevate above the drudgery. That so much of modern knowledge work is drudgery. It's sitting in front of a computer and moving things from one place to another. And if we can get machines doing that work and humans in a place where they're thinking, creative, and doing the things that only humans can do, then everybody's happier and the outcomes are better.
Mm.
Well, and Scott, to what you said earlier, it enables people to do amazing things. Let the computer do the boring stuff that it's good at, and let us and our brains do the amazing things. One of the questions I had for you, when you start talking about the mundane, I think about things like a lot of data and data management and the importance of having really good, solid data within your own system and the trading partners, whether it's hospitals or retailers or whatever. From an AI perspective, can you share your thoughts on why AI and how AI can help with data management?
Absolutely. It's a big part. Actually a really big part of our business right now. So it's near and dear to my heart. But I think I'll describe it first from like a user experience, a customer experience perspective. During the COVID era, or the early parts of it, when all of a sudden we're ordering food over apps like DoorDash, one menu item being wrong could destroy my entire experience of a restaurant, right? Like I know that there's a particular restaurant with a particular dish that I like to order with steak and not with ground beef.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow someone missed that little detail when they input that menu into the system.
Yeah.
And that restaurant went from being my favorite restaurant to a restaurant that I couldn't eat at. I guess maybe I'm too picky, but there are plenty of examples I'm sure that everyone has had of looking at a menu in a delivery app and going, wait a second, I know it's different. I know that when I go there, there's a different experience. So I'll just start with that baseline of like, that's an example of the importance of managing your catalog correctly. Just broadly, that could be SKU management in some businesses. It could be described as catalog in others. It could, in the restaurant business, it's menus. But that's such a critical part of the user experience that could be lost. This is why, when I talk about design, I want to draw as broad a frame as possible for what design is. I'm sure that there are people at Uber Eats or at DoorDash or at any of these companies that are really focused on design, and what they think that they mean by that is that they want to create a great in-app experience, and they do a pretty darn good job at that. But it all goes to naught if the content's wrong. And a big part of our work at Invisible is working with companies to make sure that that's not the case. As it turns out, a big part of our growth as a company is in working with on-demand delivery companies. So this is a very, very familiar space for us. And when you look at some of the problems that you have in that space, one is just accuracy. But I'll break down, like, I know a little bit about how menus get into these systems because we've done it at massive scale. One of the probably world's leading companies at doing this. And when you look at the problem of taking, say, a menu where the document of record, like the system of record for a menu at a random restaurant, is probably a picture. It's probably a piece of paper that's been laminated and passed around for 10 years. Now, that's a very difficult technology challenge. And it's not unsolvable by technology, but it needs some help from people. And that's just a classic problem of a situation where you might have optical character recognition tools or web scrapers to pull the data off of these kind of unofficial ad hoc systems of record called menus and put them into a system, but they always require human review. And for those of us who've worked like elbow deep in this space, what you find is that, first of all, you hate pizzas because the number of possibilities is so massive. It's vast. It's like how many ways can a deck of cards be arranged? But what you experience in that space is a perfect example of the power of orchestration of technology and people. So what you want to do is take all these menus and get that text into a system as quick as you can, and in as structured a way as you can. But then you also are going to require human review in order to make sure that you don't have an option for ordering a pork chop rare. So these little subtleties are really best suited to platforms like ours, where you have the right balance of machine approach and human approach. And when I say machine approach, I actually just mean, in the broadest sense, some sort of technology integration, not necessarily artificial intelligence. But I'll tell you a little bit more about where AI and ML techniques start to push the ball forward for us. So there are kind of a standard set of problems that you'll see in this space, and I'll just mention two. One is classification. So when working with retailers, what you'll find in some cases is that a misclassification of a particular product can cause that product to never get sold. So if you could imagine, maybe you're looking for a laptop battery, and it appears in a web e-commerce website under the batteries like AA, AAA, C cells, that no one will find that if they're looking for that, unless they search for it specifically by product name. So classification problems are key. And there are some pretty great approaches, whether they're custom tailored, custom built ML solutions, or even off the shelf solutions like GPT, that can contribute to problems in that space. Also, apart from classification problems, sometimes we have style and text issues. So you might find that, I think we've all seen the products online where the product description, when you go to order it, looks like it's been translated back and forth through 7 or 8 different languages. It's like, what does this even say? So we are today already using a combination of AI and ML techniques to address classification and text description problems in large catalogs for a number of different contexts. And what we found, even since 2020, is that the line is shifting more and more towards technology solutions, particularly these AI solutions, and particularly like broadly commoditized and not highly customized technology solutions in the AI space, like what OpenAI has done. They're moving the line farther and farther towards a place where humans don't have to do as much interpretation. And that's really powerful, and it actually creates a better product. If you've been through this, and you know, part of our culture as a company, everybody who worked for the company for Invisible in 2020 built menus for these companies. Every one of us had to deal with the horror of a pizza menu.
Yeah.
And when you do, you realize what feels like the right balance of human engagement that's productive and requires a high level of judgment, places where humans can contribute, and places where you think, wouldn't it be better if there was a tool for that?
It's so true. Scott, you and I talked about this the first time we met, and was talking about, I'm old school. I want to call up the restaurant or the fast food place, or, you know, your local deli, pizza place, sandwich shop, whatever it is, and just place an order. But they really don't want you doing that anymore, because they can be more efficient. They can be more effective. But I just had this experience 2 weeks ago. And then it also comes down to the process, right? Because it was last month. I was traveling to the New Jersey office, and there's this great Italian place very close to the office, and I always go there, get dinner, and I love their bolognese. And so I called in and I said, I'd like, bolognese with penne. And the person on the phone was like, yeah, okay, no problem. Got you. Penne, meat sauce. And I'm like, no, not meat sauce. Bolognese. Like, yeah, no, it's meat sauce in the system. You'll get it. Sure enough, I got penne with meat sauce. And the part owner was there working in the kitchen, and I'm like, is this bolognese? He goes, no, it's meat sauce. That's what the order says. The order says meat sauce. And I'm like, and it's just this is that interaction, human and machine, and it's what that person had on the screen, and the owner actually said, he goes, we have a high turnover rate. It's hard to train people, and it's hard to spend the time going through these things. But this is just one simple example. I wanted to get to another question that I think, folks would like to know your opinion on this. That I really like to know your opinion on this, and is, what do you think is next in the world of AI? You mentioned earlier about, how it's crucial with data management. You talked about, the impacts it can have on retail. You gave the very simple example of menus, and anybody, if you're having trouble sleeping one night, just start working on, program a menu with if-then statements. Mm-hmm. It will take forever. And if you think about this, I'm sorry to be long-winded here, Liz, but this is another piece. These are the human things. This comes back to your design comment, Scott, which is when I go to an app, right, like Jimmy John's or Jersey Mike's sub sandwiches, right, and I start filling out my order to get to the end, I'm like 30 minutes away from this place to get to the end, to only realize, oh, it's going to take an hour and a half for that to be done because I have so many other orders in front of you. I have no visibility to that. And I'm driving down the highway. I think I'm going to be really efficient, hit this, boom, and be gone. And then I end up waiting longer, and I'm more frustrated. And now I get a speeding ticket, and, and the domino effects and the butterfly effect and all that. But when you are in person, you pull in and you're like, okay, there's this place, and this place. That place has a line. Let's not go there. Let's go over here, because you have these visual cues. That's design in automation that a lot of people forget about.
That's right. And I think that I happen to really agree with you. So I'm not just playing along, but I really actually think that the user experience piece is a place where we have so much room to grow. And the natural thing that happens with any new technology that's introduced, humans are really adaptive. And what we find is that we start shaping ourselves to meet the technology. One example that may seem unrelated, but I often think of it, is how auto-tune has changed the way that people sing.
Wow.
And literally you hear young people who've grown up on recordings where vocals are corrected by technology to hit specific frequencies perfectly. And I think that, and there are also some clear artifacts of that process. There are some people like T-Pain who's famously used that as an effect. But now they're human beings, like humans who've grown up and learned to sing and trained their vocal cords to sound like a machine correction of a human voice singing. And I think that's all kinds of wrong. I'm just going to say aesthetically, like my reaction to that is like, oh, what a shame. But that just is an example of how adaptive humans are. And I think that we need to pay it back a little bit. While the revolutions of personal computing and the internet and now AI will take a while for us to digest, I hope that it leads us, and I expect that it will lead to us to a place that's a little bit more practical about human factors. So as you're describing this example of going through a process of like entering in different menu items and only finding out at the end, that's an example of making a human being act like a machine. And that's just all wrong. And one of the things that's really exciting that we see with some of these generative text type large language models like GPT is that they enable more like natural language conversations with people. So you might be able to say exactly what you said to a person. And your example of the bolognese, like that's a human acting like a machine. Sorry, this has to go in my system. It's like he's impersonating, or that person is impersonating a robot. And what we need is systems that are more human.
Yeah.
And the technology can actually enable that kind of more human interaction and elevate the human experience.
Well, I'm noticing the time, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we got to keep this going here. And I'm like, just thoroughly enjoying this conversation. You kind of answered my question I was trying to get to, which was, where do we see AI going in the future? And it's it's going to impact everything in lots of different ways and free us up. We need to move on to our last two questions here. And Liz, why don't you go ahead with the first one?
Yeah, so Scott, when we end the podcast, we like to ask these two questions, and I'm really excited, Reed, to hear your answer because you have so much technology experience. But in your either work life or day-to-day personal life, what is the favorite technology that you're using right now?
Wow, that's a really tough one. That's really, really hard. I think I continue to be amazed at ChatGPT, and I continue to be amazed at how, as we re-engage with how we communicate with this platform and with this technology, we see more and more beneficial outcomes. And I think that the specific thing, it's not just ChatGPT itself that's interesting, but the way that we communicate. There's a fancy term for this, prompt engineering, right? Like the input that you give will determine the output. But it's sort of like the monolith in 2001. It's like this alien technology has arrived. This incomprehensibly large and sophisticated tool, and we're still trying to figure out like what to do with it, how to engage with it. And specifically the part that's interesting is not just the responses, but the way that we speak to it. So I've alluded, I think it was a New York Times article about someone probing the new Bing interactive search experience and how it ended up saying these weird sort of going into an existential crisis. But I think what's telling about that is not the responses of the people, but the way that it was prompted by a human. And I'm partly thinking, what are you doing, dude? Like, what is going on with you? What are you trying to achieve here? But I think that specifically the way that we engage with this technology is the interesting part.
It's amazing to me. I have a YouTube feed that I check out once a day, and the number of ChatGPT new ways of their leveraging it, not just for writing, but for code writing, for creating things in Excel. And I'm like, wait, you could do that? And then they show you in 10 minutes.
Oh yeah.
So our next question, we always end with what has blown your mind? And it may have been something that happened as a child or in a young adult life or your adult life. It could be something at work. It could be something, at home, just something that was like a point in your life that your mind was just blown and your perspective on the world changed.
There's so many things. First of all, I will say, you mentioned this earlier, our engineers at Invisible already use Copilot. They already use a tool that helps them to write code that's AI based, because so much of the job of engineering is remembering minutia. And a great engineer is focused on solving business problems with technology, not just mastering the minutia. And so I'm enthusiastic and thrilled about that. I think for me, one of the things that really inspires me are places where technology can drive art, whether that be whatever your particular form of creative expression. And one of the most impressive things that I've seen that's out there in that space is Apple has created a few different products in their music creation tools. In Logic, they have drummer personalities, and they're described based on adjectives like, they actually give a drummer a name and describe his style. Oh, well, he's sort of a Laurel Canyon folky drummer who prefers it. Like, okay, cool. And the amazing thing is that you can adjust through a UI that's basically adjectives and vibes, how you would like that drummer to play along with the track that you've recorded. And I think it's magical. And I think that there's a tremendous opportunity for that to, and that's several years old. There's a tremendous opportunity for technologies like that to get people back into a space of play. And I think that the highest form of work is actually play, just like the highest form of art is humor. That as human beings, like what we're aspire to, what we're driven to, is delight and joy. And when you think about technology, so often you think of it being tied to drudgery. It drags us down. And being elevated by technology to a place where your experience of work is more like play, that's the highest goal for me and for us as a company.
Well, we can't thank you enough for spending the time with us today. And you just talked about like the highlights, and I don't know if others have picked up on it, but technology should be invisible. I love what you all are doing with process, and that you can be our process Sherpas, take us to the mountaintop and back, because it is a fine art, and it's asking those questions upon questions upon questions, and challenging ourselves. I took away the orchestration part, right? It's that right balance between human attention and machine attention. And yeah, I mean, there was a lot to unpack, and I just want to thank you for the time today. Really enjoyed the conversation.
My pleasure.
Thank you for joining the Next Level Supply Chain with GS1US. If you enjoyed today's show, you can subscribe to our feed or explore more great episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to share and follow us on social media. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.